We are on week 2 of our sermon series on worship. And we are looking at worship in the desert this week. And that's both the kind of physical desert, as in the Old Testament, when the people of God were out in the desert. How did they worship? And also the kind of the metaphor desert. How do we worship when things are bad? How do we worship when we're tired, when we come into a church service and we're just dog tired? A friend of mine who shall remain nameless was once leading a service, and whilst halfway through a prayer, oh bless you, whilst halfway through a prayer he was praying, he fell asleep. And that, I would say that is quite a high thing to do, but he was literally just started praying, God, thank you for being here at this meeting and for blessing us. And he went off, that was it. He was halfway through a prayer and off he went. How do we worship when we may be sitting there in a congregation and we're kind of getting angry? It's more than a couple of years ago, the second time we wonderfully decided to invade Iraq. A church I was going to, the minister stood up and did a 20-minute sermon on why the invasion of Iraq was a just war. And I sat there, I was livid. I just sat there thinking, I sat there going all the way through, didn't cover myself in glory on the way out, shook his hand and said, well, that's the biggest load of dross dressed up in truth I've heard in a long time. And the conversation didn't go too well after that. So how do we worship in that context? How do we get to a point where we've been like months where we've not felt God's presence, and we turn up at church after a week of just intense work, and we get to church and we just can't sing? How do we do that? So today we're going to start, this first half of this sermon series is me babbling on about worship in the Old Testament. So we're going to start in Exodus. Turn to page 64. Last week, we said that the kind of aims for the worship series were that we're going to learn about worship, and in some cases relearn about worship. We are going to renew our hearts. We're going to look to our own hearts, our kind of personal and corporate reflection of our hearts on worship, and we're going to refocus our whole lives around worship. It's like a kind of worship MOT. And then by the end of this sermon series, hopefully we'll get to a point both personally and corporately as Oak Tree, we'll have a deeper, more intimate understanding and appreciation of worship. We'll have our whole life refocused around worship, and we'll actually model to each other and to people outside the church how best to worship. So let's turn to that passage. Exodus chapter 7, verse 16. We've had the creation story last week. We kind of jumped through a few things. And we've got to a point where the people of God, the Hebrews, the Israelites, they are in slavery. Moses appeared on the scene and he has gone to see the Pharaoh. Exodus chapter 7, verse 16. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent to me to say to you, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness. That's the call of God to Pharaoh put through Moses. It's the start of having the plagues. We've not got time today, but each of the plagues is set up as a mockery of the gods that they used to worship in Egypt. They used to worship locusts and frogs and the sun, and it went dark, and the Nile, and it was turned red. And each one was set up as a mockery of their gods. These commandments, as we followed in, they get liberated. They go out into the desert. They go to Mount Sinai. They have a bit of a sideline into idolatry with a golden calf. They get given the 10 Commandments. But their reality was living in this desert and the kind of, if you imagine the map, the kind of that angle, the around the Red Sea and the bottom half of Israel. That was their lived reality, a desert. In my a couple of times I've been about in my year out, I went to live in Israel for a year, and we thought it'd be great to go and have a day's outing in the desert. And we thought we'd do the walk from Jerusalem to Jericho, which would have been the setting for the Good Samaritan. And all the good guidebooks said, start the walk at about 3 a.m. So what did we do? Started at 10, and we thought it'd be great. And we walked from the outskirts of Jerusalem down into Jericho. We took with us, we each had a massive 2-litre bottle, two liter bottles of water that we froze the night before. That was the organized bit of the journey. And we walked all the way to Jericho, went through midday, got there about 2 p.m. I have never been so hot in my life. We drank, all of us drank the water we had with us, and for the whole day I never went on the loo. It was so hot. This was the reality of the Israelites. They lived in the desert. Their lived reality was a desert, but their worshipping reality was God living and being amongst them. Just quickly flick to Exodus chapter 25 on page 83. Their reality was living, eating, breathing, washing in the desert. But their worshipping reality was God being amongst them. Exodus chapter 25, verse 8, and this is directive from God. Then let them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Then let them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Dwell among them, another word that's just been translated in different translations, and I will tabernacle amongst them. That is God being right in the midst of the people of God. That was last week's talk. So the worship in the desert. And this is what that tabernacle would have looked like. It's not a great picture. I'll leave it at the end of the service and people can have a closer look. But this was a tent that was put up every time they stopped in the desert. Wherever they were, wherever they traveled, God was put at the center of where they lived. All the different kind of tents where they were around this place. But the tabernacle, where the signs of God's presence, the pillar of fire at night and the cloud of smoke during the day, and the Holy of Holies was right in the center of where they were. Wherever they traveled, God was at the center. Wherever they stopped, the first thing they were told to do was to put up the tabernacle. So that stressed the importance of God being at the center, of God being a priority. Whenever they ate, they ate their food thanking God, because God should be at the center of wherever they were and whatever they did. Everything was focused around the worshipped presence and indwelling reality of God amongst them. It wasn't a secondary thought. It wasn't the second thing they did. When we used to go on holiday as a whole family, it was only the journey there was the kind of major stress bit. But the next big stressful bit is once you get there. It's like, who's going to set the tent up? Who's going to do that? Who's going to go and look after the kids? Oh, wait a minute, you've got to put a pasta on so they've got tea once they get there, but the kids want to go swimming. So that all these different things come in as possible priorities. This wasn't the case with the Israelites. When you stop, your first priority is God being at the center. God being at the center of living, God being at the center of worship, God being the center of who we were as a people. Which, when we get to Monday morning, when does our desert begin? Does it begin at the office when you sit down at your desk and you open your emails and you've got hundreds of them sat in your inbox? Is that your desert? then the question is, where is your tabernacle? Where is God in the presence of those emails? When does our desert start? Is it when we get on the tube in the morning and you're slightly short stature and you stood next to somebody like me and there's kind of sharing of body odor on a crowded, warm tube? Is that our desert? Then where is our tabernacle? Where is God dwelling amongst them? When we're surrounded by kids and we're trying to organize a packed lunch and find matching socks and for oh my word, wait till your kids are old enough to go for Twyford when they've got to have the multicolored pen, for crying out loud. Who came up with that idea? They've got to have a pen of 4 different colors and they've got to have a whiteboard marker. And oh, wait a minute, they've lost the whiteboard marker. This one's run out. And they're running around. Oh my word, you've got my tie. That's not your tie, it's my tie. It's got the Tipp-Ex mark on it. And the kids are just running and it's mad. Is that your desert time? And the question is, where is your tabernacle? Or we've just got back from new wine and you've got everything packed away and it's fine and dandy and you loved it and there's thousands of people worshipping in a tent and it's raining outside, but it doesn't matter, but you've got back. And you're thinking, oh, I've got to wait another 11 months before I can go back there. Because it's not as good as new wine. Where is your tabernacle in amongst that? Where is your desert? Whatever your desert is, your priority should be where God dwells. First and foremost, before you do anything, God should be the priority. At the end of last week, we finished with a bit of a reading from Revelation. If we jump forward again to page 1249, I'm just going to read a few more verses from Revelation. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God." And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God." We can easily get distracted by our desert. We can easily get distracted with the hullabaloo of the week, and we don't set out how important God is. He wants to dwell amongst not just us corporately, but us individually. Whatever we're doing, however we're doing it, our priority should be, how is God indwelling in this situation? On Friday, I went to yet another funeral of a friend who died of cancer. Guy who is just 4 years older than me, worship leader, an amazing, sensitive servant heart. How do you worship in a place where somebody as a worship leader has just died of cancer over 4 months? The church was filled with nearly 400 people worshiping their hearts out because the priority for Malcolm was God. And so it should be for us. Whatever our desert is, whether it's grieving, whether it's health, whether it's our work situation, whether it's our not work situation, our first and foremost, our indwelling of where God is should be a priority. I'm going to ask the band to come back up. Can we do Restore My Soul again, please? And we're going to use the song as a reflection to ask all of us, corporately and individually, what is our desert and what are you going to do about it? Because God wants to dwell in that desert with you. We grow the most when we're in those deserts, when we turn to God. If you want to stand, feel free to stand. If you want to stay sitting, stay sitting. If you want to be quiet and just close your eyes, do that. But this time is spent now when we want to address that. Firstly, what is our desert and where do we need to put God?